January 1943. A gray morning settles over western Germany. Frost clings to the edges of airfields and forests alike. Somewhere above the cloud layer, contrails stretch thin across the sky, dissolving almost as soon as they form. On the ground, civilians pause mid-step as the distant hum of engines drifts in from the west. Low at first, then steadily growing. It is not the sharp cry of fighters. It is deeper, heavier, layered. A sound that seems too large to belong to a single machine. By this point in the war, German pilots know that sound well. What they do not yet fully understand is where it comes from or how it can keep coming back. In the early years of the conflict, Germany's air war doctrine rested on speed, precision, and elite skill. The Luftwaffe had been built around the belief that wars would be short and decisive, won by trained professionals flying advanced machines. In Poland, France, and the opening stages of the Soviet campaign, this belief appeared justified. German aces accumulated victories at a pace unmatched by any other air force. Their experience bred confidence. Their records reinforced the idea that quality, not quantity, ruled the sky. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, many German aviators viewed American air power with skepticism. The Americans were believed to rely on mass rather than mastery, on machines rather than pilots. Early encounters seemed to confirm this assumption. U.S. bomber formations were inexperienced. Their tactics were still evolving. Losses were heavy. But beneath those early struggles, something else was forming, far beyond the reach of German bombers, in places Luftwaffe pilots would never see. The United States did not prepare for war the way Europe had. Its cities were not under siege. Its factories were not working under blackout conditions or constant threat of air attack. Instead, they expanded outward. Assembly lines lengthened. Shifts multiplied. New plants rose from farmland and empty plains. By 1942, American industry was producing aircraft at a scale previously considered impossible. At the center of this effort stood the heavy bomber, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and the consolidated B-24 Liberator were not subtle machines. They were large, loud, and built to absorb punishment. Bristling with defensive guns, armored where earlier bombers had been fragile, they represented a new idea, that bombers could fight their way to the target, and do so in daylight. German fighter pilots first encountered massed American bomber formations over occupied Europe in 1942. What they expected was a continuation of earlier patterns. Small groups, limited escorts, formations that could be broken apart with skill and timing. What they encountered instead were box formations stacked across the sky, guns overlapping, aircraft flying so close that damage to one did not always mean separation from the group. The emotional contrast was immediate. Luftwaffe aces who had dominated the skies in 1940 and 1941 now found themselves attacking walls of aircraft that refused to dissolve. Even successful attacks often came at a cost. A bomber destroyed still left behind others that pressed on. What unsettled German pilots most was not just the resilience of the bombers, but their numbers that U.S. Army Air Force's records show that by 1943, American factories were producing aircraft at a rate exceeding 8,000 per month. At peak output, the United States was completing nearly one heavy bomber every hour. This was not propaganda. It was arithmetic. Assembly plants at Boeing, Consolidated, Douglas, and Lockheed ran continuously, day and night. Completed aircraft rolled off lines and were replaced immediately by the next airframe. German intelligence began to grasp the scale of this effort with growing alarm. Intercepted production figures seemed implausible. Reports from pilots returning from combat described bomber streams that appeared endless, losses replaced within days. One Luftwaffe officer later noted that destroying a single American bomber felt like removing one brick from a factory. By 1943, German aces faced a cruel inversion of expectations. Skill still mattered, but it no longer decided outcomes on its own. An experienced pilot could down several bombers in a mission, only to face the same formations again days later, unchanged in strength. The Americans absorbed losses not as catastrophe, but as cost. Documented Luftwaffe reports from this period reveal a shift in tone. Early confidence gave way to concern, then to resignation. Pilots spoke of fatigue, not just from combat, but from repetition. The enemy returned regardless of weather, regardless of losses. The sky no longer felt finite. The transformation was psychological as much as tactical. German airmen had been trained to think in terms of individual victory, kills, medals, recognition. The American approach was impersonal by comparison. Crews rotated home. Aircraft were replaced. Losses were recorded, studied, and folded back into training and design. The system learned even when individuals fell. One sound came to symbolize this transformation: the layered drone of hundreds of bomber engines merging into a single presence. It began long before the aircraft appeared overhead and lingered after they passed. For civilians, it meant danger. For pilots, it meant inevitability. The sound did not suggest daring or precision. It suggested scale. Behind that sound lay an industrial reality Germany could not match. While American factories expanded, German production struggled under bombing, shortages, and forced dispersal. Skilled workers were drafted. Materials grew scarce. Aircraft designs became more advanced but harder to produce in volume. Each loss carried more weight. By 1944, even Germany's most experienced aces acknowledged the imbalance. Some continued to achieve remarkable tallies, but their victories no longer altered the course. It relies on systems that outlast units fear were stretched thin alike. Fuel the German aces learned training hours for new pilots were cut dramatically. Against the foe producing bombers by the measured in engines, attrition became a losing and the quiet realization American production figures always from 1944 tell the story plainly. That year alone, the United States built more than 96,000 aircraft of all types. Bombers rolled out with standardized parts, predictable maintenance cycles, and crews trained through systems refined by constant feedback. War had become an exercise in sustained capacity. When German pilots spoke after the war, many did so without bitterness. They described realizing, often too late, that the conflict was not truly being fought in the skies over Europe. It was being fought in factories, rail yards, and training fields thousands of miles away. The air battles were merely the visible edge of a deeper struggle. The bomber itself became a symbol of this realization. Not a single aircraft, but the idea of it, repeated endlessly, reliably, without pause. Each formation represented not just crews in the air, but a society capable of replacing them, supporting them, and learning from each mission. By the final months of the war, the skies over Germany grew quieter, not because resistance had ceased, but because it had been exhausted. Wreckage littered airfields and cities alike. Engines fell silent. Assembly lines elsewhere continued until victory was assured. In the end, the lesson was stark. Courage and skill could shape moments, but abundance shaped outcomes. The American bomber offensive did not succeed because every mission was flawless. It succeeded because it could continue, because losses did not halt the process, because production turned time itself into a weapon. Long after the war, that truth endured. Freedom, when backed by sustained effort and shared capacity, does not rely on single heroes. It relies on systems that outlast fear and failure alike. The German aces learned this not from speeches or statistics, but from the sky itself, measured in engines, in formations, and in the quiet realization that the enemy could always build another.